Okay, welcome back. We are talking about Paul's letters to the 7 churches. And we saw in our last segment his letters to Rome and the 2 letters to Corinth and the letter to Galatians and the letter to Ephesus. Now today let's start with the epistle to Philippi, Philippians. Now Philippi was the first European church to be founded by Paul, and now the church has now gone to Europe. Okay, the first European church. But Philippi, although was in Europe, was the poorest of all the churches. Philippians were the poorest people, but they were very lovely people. They were hospitable, nice, giving. When you have a lot, you can give. But then when you give without having a lot, now that touches your heart, doesn't it? And when Paul went to Philippi, the people were so welcoming, friendly, nice and lovely. And the church started thriving there, and everything was wonderful. But then Europe was also a seat of heathenism. So not many people really enjoyed Christianity. So the church was not very much persecuted like in Smyrna, but it was not welcomed either. So the people in Philippi had to go through a lot of financial suffering and other ways of suffering. And Paul wrote to them, which many scholars call a love letter. Paul was just dripping with love to them. Paul's love letter. And a lot of encouragement is there in that book. There he says, rejoice in the Lord. Why does he say that? Because you guys don't have other reasons to rejoice. You don't have money. You don't have other things. You have problems being Christians. And just rejoice in the Lord always. And he's repeating it again, I say, rejoice. Now also, European Christians had to face some heresies. And these heretics were called dogs by Paul. In Philippians chapter 3, you will see Paul admonishing them, beware of the dogs. Now, that's not something that you put on your gate. Now, you will see this Bible verse in a lot of gates, beware of dogs. Now, here he connotes the heretics. Okay, heretics. So, if you read the book of Philippians, just know that. Now, don't confuse the book of Philippians with Filipinos today. Okay, they have nothing to do with Philippi has nothing to do with Philippines. The Philippians have nothing to do with the Filipinos. Okay, so I have nothing against the Filipinos though. It's a love letter of Paul. Okay, now let's go to the next epistle, Colossians. Colossae. Hey, do you want to know where Colossae was? Remember the 7 churches of Revelation? Asia Minor, Laodicea. This was just 12 miles from Laodicea. So the church in Colossae was situated in the area where the 7 churches of Revelation were situated. So Colossians were very important in that Paul was on the pretext of writing to the Colossians. He was actually writing to a large audience of Asia Minor. And in the book of Colossians, you will see 2 main things, the 4 chapters. You would see Paul talking about the supremacy of Christ over and above everything. Because these people started to glorify many other things. Worship became more prominent, and the way of life became more prominent. And good things, not bad things, but good things started to outgrow Christ. Now that's not right, is it? Now what is Antichristos, Antichrist. The Greek word anti or anti or anti has two meanings: against or as opposed to, or in place of, substitution. So by being an antichrist, one can actually oppose Christ or replace Christ. So even a good thing replacing Christ becomes an antichrist. So that was mainly happening in Colossae. Good things like worship, prayer, and the Christian lifestyle, these things overtook Christ, and Paul wanted to bring them back to their senses, saying, no, it's Christ who should be supreme in everything. The superiority, the supremacy of Christ is emphasized. And also there is, in the second section, a little bit of advice as to how to live a practical life. So that's the epistle to the Colossians. And the seventh church Paul was writing, he wrote two epistles, and that's to Thessalonica or Thessalonica, depending on how you would want to pronounce it. Another European city, but these people were naive, and let me tell you, they were stupid also. They interpreted what Jesus said in a very weird literal sense. Jesus said, I will come soon. They thought Jesus was going to come soon in their lifetime. You know what they did? They read the word, they heard the teachings of Paul. If you read the First Thessalonians, you'll see that Paul was talking about the coming of Jesus, and they took everything so bluntly and so literally, and they began to say things like, we don't have to go for work. Our children don't need to go to school. Why? Because Jesus is coming. So we don't need to look after our house. Everything is going to perish. So let's get ready to welcome Jesus, and let's get ready to be raptured. So they stopped going for work. They stopped studying. They stopped cleaning their homes. They stopped cultivating, tending their animals. And then Paul had to write his second epistle saying, hey, hang on a minute there. Wait. In his second epistle to them, he had to say, yes, Jesus is coming soon. Yes, but there are certain things that need to happen before he comes. And he explains, it's not going to happen the way you think. So come back, come down from those hills. These guys, these Thessalonians, would go and climb hills wanting to be raptured first before the people down in the valley. Crazy. We get these crazy people even today. Suddenly somebody would come and they'll fix a date for the coming of Jesus and say, okay, Jesus is coming on September 23rd of this particular year. And I think once when I was driving to California, right along I-40 after I crossed Nevada into California, my goodness, from time to time were there these billboards with the timer counting down that Jesus was coming in 3 months and 2 days and 7.5 hours. This Thessalonian stupidity is there in many parts of the world. You can get these guys down in Korea, in China, in India, even in Sri Lanka. Some fellows are setting date for the coming of Jesus, and they're doing weird things. They should start reading the epistle of 2 Thessalonians. Now, I am not saying the coming of the Lord is not going to happen soon. I am not saying that the rapture will not happen soon. I believe we are living in the last days, and I believe he can come anytime. Fine, but let's live our life the normal way. Let's be ready to meet Jesus if he comes today. And let's be ready to live another 50 years on earth if he doesn't show up. That's exactly what Paul was trying to say in 2 Thessalonians. Okay, friends, so now we have studied the synopsis of Paul's letters, 9 letters to the 7 churches. The churches in Rome, Corinth, Galatia, Ephesus, Philippi, Colossae, and Thessalonica. Okay, now let's talk about 4 more epistles which are personal in nature. Paul was writing to 3 individuals these 4 epistles. He writes 2 epistles to a guy called Timothy, 1st and 2nd Timothy. Then another epistle to a guy called Titus or Titus. Then a letter to a man called Philemon or Philemon. Okay? Who was Timothy? A young man who became a Christian through the ministry of Paul, Timothy's grandmother, and Timothy got saved through the ministry of Paul, and Timothy became an assistant to Paul. Remember, we talked about the epistle to Colossae, the Colossians. Actually, Colossians was authored by Paul and Timothy. Actually, Timothy did not write a lot, but then he co-authored it. Some of the words therein are those of Timothy. Okay? Anyway, Timothy was a wonderful man. He mainly served in 2 places. Once for some time in Corinth, and then his last days he spent in Ephesus. So when you read the pastoral epistles, we call 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus pastoral epistles because Timothy and Titus were assistant pastors to Paul. So these epistles were not just personal in nature, they were also admonitions to young pastors, pastoral epistles. So if you read Timothy, 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy, there are things that pertain to Timothy's ministry in Corinth, and there are things that pertain to Timothy's ministry in Ephesus. So you need to really decipher and decode, something like decoding, deciphering what Paul was saying to Timothy. What did Timothy get from this? So don't just read these verses and try to appropriate it into every context. You need to find the real context and then appropriate it. Okay? So 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy are pastoral advices and admonitions, exhortations to Timothy from Paul. Paul was talking about the personal behavior of Timothy, the personal faith and corporate behavior, and how to preach, and how to preach to people who can preach in return, how to teach people who can teach in return, and how to treat women, how to treat older women, how to treat younger women, how to treat widows, how to treat virgins, how to treat men. All these practical suggestions are all there in these 2 lovely pastoral epistles. Okay? So if you don't really understand, don't worry. Whenever you get a chance to study these books, then you will know. And it will really matter if you are a pastor. I believe that every pastor should study deep these 3 epistles. The 2 epistles to Timothy and the epistle to Titus. Okay, so they are the 2 epistles to Timothy, a young man. That's why Paul says, hey, let not people look down upon you because you're young. Even today that's happening, doesn't it? Now I have been a pastor for 34 years and I'm 52 now. And when I became a pastor, I was barely 18. I became a full-time pastor of 3 churches 1 month before I turned 18. I preached my first sermon when I was 13. So I had my youth against me because I had to preach to adults and I had to lay hands and pray for them and serve communion. I had a hard time. Now it's okay, now people are welcoming me open-handedly, but then 30 years ago, People had a hard time accepting me as a pastor. Now that happened to Timothy. And Paul is saying, now you better wear the appropriate dress and speak the appropriate language and behave in an appropriate manner, lest should anyone discount you on your youthfulness. Okay, so if you are a young servant of God, be like Timothy, take these advices to heart, right? Okay, let's go to Titus. Titus, like Luke, was a proselyte Jew. He used to be a Greek, and he was not like Timothy. He was an older man and educated man. He was like Silas. Silas was also a proselyte, and he was also a pastor. Titus was also a pastor, but then he was an assistant to Paul. So Paul had all the rights to give him the admonition. So the difference I see in Paul's letters to Timothy and Paul's letter to Titus is that Paul writes to a young pastor, to Timothy, and to an older pastor, Titus. But you'll see things that overlap, similar things, how to run a church, how to appoint people, so on and so forth. So you can enjoy the epistle to Titus in that manner. Okay? Then Paul wrote to a man called Philemon or Philemon. It's just one chapter, and if you read, it is a wonderful epistle. Not many people understand the contents of Philemon. Philemon was a very rich, elite man who used to live in Ephesus and Colossae, in these two places. But he came to the Lord through Paul. So Paul was the spiritual father of this rich, educated guy called Philemon. Okay? Now Paul, when he was in Rome, many years after he left Philemon, one day, when Paul was under house arrest, a young man was brought, and Paul preached the gospel to this young man, and this young man became a Christian. And then this young man not only became a Christian, he started to help Paul in many ways, going in, getting things for him, and he was a wonderful young lad. His name was Onesimus. And then Paul spoke to this young man, of course, now he's a Christian and everything. So, where are you, boy? Where are you from? Where are your parents from? What sort of a man are you? Blah, 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 blah. And then Paul got a shock to hear that this Onesimus was a slave of Philemon. And he had stolen some things from Philemon and run away. And he had come to Rome. Why? Because Rome was the capital of the world. People can easily hide there. So he hid his identity. Nobody knew who Onesimus was. But then Paul, who brought Philemon to the Lord, has now brought Onesimus to the Lord. And Paul discovers that this Onesimus has been the slave, the thieving slave, the unfaithful slave to Philemon. Now Paul says something very interesting. Paul says, Onesimus, you are no longer a slave. We are not slaves anymore, right? And you know what? Your former master is also a Christian now. And what shall we do? You have to go back to him. And Onesimus was like, how can I go? I stole a lot from him. And Paul was saying, no worries. Now he will not treat you as a slave, because you and him, you are now brothers, because both of you have come to the Lord. And through me. Onesimus was hesitating. No, sir, I'll be here. I can't go back. Paul says, no, I'm sending you to him with a little letter. That's this epistle. And it says some beautiful things. Now read it, okay? It's very interesting. Sweet. It's sweet and lovely. And Paul was very diplomatic. Paul says, Philemon, how are you? Philemon, I found this guy. This guy has come to the Lord through me, and he was your slave. I know he has injured you, damaged you, he robbed you, but I will pay. I will pay what he robbed from you. But Philemon, actually you owe me your life, don't you? You were a heathen and you came to the Lord through me. So shall we knock it off? Can you just forget what Onesimus did? Can you accept him back into your house? Not as a slave anymore, boy, because he is also my son. You are my son and he is my son. And you both are Christians and you are brothers. So I trust that you will do the needful in the right way by accepting Onesimus back into your household, not as a slave, but as a brother. Okay, now I really want to keep this guy with me. He's very helpful. Onesimus is wonderful. But I don't think it's right. So I am returning him to you. Wonderful, isn't it? So it's a sweet little epistle which teaches people like us, senior pastors. Now if you are a senior pastor and if somebody comes to work with you, having caused damage in some other places, then you know what to do, right? A lot of things need to be learned. Okay, to wrap this section up, let's go to Hebrews real fast. As I said, I believe the epistle to the Hebrews was written by Paul. Okay, although it doesn't contain internal evidence. Now, what is this epistle? It's written to Christians who have become Christians from being Jews. And they can be living in Jerusalem, in Rome, anywhere. So this was for the Messianic Jews of Paul's day. And he's writing in a Jewish way. He's saying, look, friends, God gave us his progressive revelation through prophets and visions and and finally he gave the ultimate revelation through Jesus. And he is explaining, the book of Hebrews is explaining the Old Testament in the New Testament language to the New Testament people of the Old Testament. Confusing, isn't it? He's in chapter 11, in chapter 11 he's listing the heroes of faith. And he's saying, you got to have faith now. Even in the Old Testament, people had faith. And how Jesus is the high priest, not in the Hebraic order. Because in the Hebraic Jewish order, Jesus had to come from the tribe of Levi to be a priest. But Jesus' priesthood doesn't come from Aaron or the tribe of Levi, because Jesus comes from the tribe of Judah. But it comes from Melchizedek. Okay, of Genesis 14. If you read Hebrews chapters 7 and 8, it will explain a lot about Melchizedek and the link between Melchizedek and Jesus. So have this in your mind. It will be a difficult book for you to understand, the book of Hebrews. But know this, it is written to the Jews who had now become Messianic, who had a profound knowledge of the Old Testament. And Paul is explaining to them how important the Old Testament is and how Jesus is the fulfillment of all what the Old Testament talks about. Okay, friends, so these are the 14 epistles of Paul. I believe that you will enjoy the Pauline or the Pauline epistles. And in our next segment, may I meet you with the general epistles. Till then, God bless you.